Aloha and talofa, hafa and welcome to NDPTC's third Thursday on this March 21st day, March 22nd for those across the date line. And today we have, some excellent panelists who are joining us today for to discuss this topic, this ongoing discussion on multi-hazard disaster planning for vulnerable populations. And so, we look at building resilient communities is especially important for small island rural communities where assistance and supplies can take days and weeks to arrive. And especially including vulnerable populations in disaster planning, we must ensure that the needs of our vulnerable populations or covered populations are considered and incorporated into all of our planning efforts. And so building on lessons learned in previous disasters, our presenters today will discuss some of the importance of partnerships and trainings in multi-hazard disaster planning initiatives for vulnerable populations in the Pacific Territory. So with that, I will let our panelists introduce themselves as we go through each of today's presentation. But first, a few housekeeping issues. If you have any questions throughout our discussions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and we will try to address them as we go along or give our panelists an opportunity to respond. Karen, do you have any other housekeeping for us before we start?
Perhaps just one more thing. Questions will be answered at the end of everyone's presentation. So please rest be assured we'll be answering your questions at the end through the chat. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have our lineup for today. We will start with Mr. Landon Adlet, and then of the National Weather Service office in Guam. Then we will move over to Tafa Tupuola of the Pacific Center in Human Security at the American Samoa Community College in American Samoa. Then we will head over to Eileen Babauta at the University Center of Excellence for Developmental Disabilities in CNMI, and then some tips and protocols on how we can conduct projects in working with vulnerable populations in the region. So over to you, Landon. Thank you.
All right, hafa adai, and thank you so much, Ginger, for the introductions and stuff, and great to see everyone here this morning. And so I am the warning coordination meteorologist here at the National Weather Service forecast office over on Guam, overseeing the forecasts and warnings responsibilities for all of the Western North Pacific, including Guam, the CNMI, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, the Republic of Palau, and the Federated States of Micronesia. So we have a very large, complex, and diverse mission over here with its unique challenges and stuff. And so we're going to talk about serving the underserved communities. And of course, that differs from locality to locality. Different cities and states and territories, they have different underserved communities that they must keep in mind when it comes to weather forecast and disaster planning and preparedness. And so the Weather Service mission statement, of course, is focused on protecting life and property. And we do that through our weather or water climate data forecast warnings and our communications, our impact-based decision support services to, again, protect life and property. And so we do that for everybody. If you're alive and thriving, we are here to serve you as public servants in the Weather Service. And so we want to make sure that everybody's getting that information in a way that you can be prepared and take the appropriate actions to stay safe. And so the vision is to have a weather-ready community, to have more communities resilient to extreme weather, water, and climate events. And that's through our outreach, our external engagement, our partnerships with stakeholders in the community at the territorial, the local, the state, and the national levels. It's a whole community approach. Everyone has a stake in this process. And so we want everyone to be involved in our preparedness and our communications. It's a force multiplier effect through the Weather Ready Nation, enlisting ambassadors across the community through organizations and offices to help us communicate our information to the community and service equity, of course, for those who are underserved and vulnerable. And that may be a different person or an entity in your community. And so who are those underserved communities? And of course, relationships and partnerships with our government and private sector stakeholders, our schools, our social and health providers, to help them know and understand weather threats and how to be best prepared for whatever nature throws our way. And so this was a changing moment for me last year, October 2023, during Typhoon Balawan. We were doing some heavy weather briefs, and this, of course, was our second tropical cyclone threat in 2023 following Typhoon Mawar. In this storm, FEMA External Affairs, they had a lot of folks on board following the response and recovery efforts of Typhoon Mawar. And you notice Alyssa, she's providing the ASL interpretation during the heavy weather briefs. This was a first for me. And so it was a learning experience to get used to having somebody next to me while doing these heavy weather briefs, but also providing that interpretation. And so after Mawar, the Weather Service Pacific region was saying, great job, WFO Guam, on the communications. But what about these folks? What about this community? Are you doing any work to engage this part of your community? And so the answer was largely no, because we've never had ASL interpretation. We've never dealt with people with special needs. And so we were asking that question because what is the need on Guam? What is the need in the CNMI? What is the need specifically for those communities, the people that have special needs in the larger region? So we started asking those questions late last year. And so the strategic plan for the Weather Service is through partnerships and communication between the Weather Service, emergency management, the community, and the private sector, amplifying voices in local communities. Everyone is important. The Weather Service must adapt and focus on a whole community approach toward community engagement. And we do that through the Weather Ready Nation, our benchmark outreach program in the National Weather Service, but also to identify priority community preparedness objectives and conduct severe weather event preparedness planning that includes everyone. And so we have to keep that in mind in all of our communications efforts. And this is where we've got this partnership with Tafa and Ginger and Eileen. We really came together late last year in this specific discussion to see how we can work with the community in this area. So the goal, of course, is to become the next generation community engagement program with the Weather Service, define resilience-based performance metrics, and change the mindset from programmatic to strategic view of the whole community, and working with community strengths to work with those most vulnerable. Who are we partnering with in the community? I've learned so many about organizations just on Guam and the CNMI that deal with people with special needs that I never knew existed until I started asking these questions. That's who we need to partner with to really engage these communities. And of course, integrating our benchmark weather service programs like Storm Ready, Tsunami Ready, and the Weather Ready Ambassadors and Skywarn programs to promote our services to the full community. And so back in 2021, the Weather Service did an assessment that revealed a mission critical need to systematically and intentionally engage underserved communities. And again, this is going to differ between whether you're on Guam or in Pohnpei of Micronesia or in Detroit or Miami. We all have these communities that are not being appropriately reached and worked with the Weather Service and preparedness. So who are those communities? And we have to ask those questions. And so we did that exactly last year. We have to ask ourselves these questions. Who are underserved communities? How do we engage these communities? Do we engage these communities? How can we do better? What are the needs in our community for weather and disaster preparedness? And where can the Weather Service and the emergency management community improve their products and services to these communities? And what steps do we take to move forward? And so you have to ask yourself as a government stakeholder in emergency preparedness these questions. And you know, the best way to do that is ask the questions to the community. And we did that on CNMI just a month ago at the Primo conference. We had a town hall meeting to ask these questions to the community, because what better way to gauge the needs of the community than to ask the community these questions? And so, does your operational plan include those with special needs? Is there a need in the community for special considerations? And where to get started? Ask those questions. Communications is everything in our business. So go ahead and partner with community organizations. We're doing that here. Engage with and learn from those organizations, and engage with neighboring jurisdictions. What do your counterparts do? What are their successes? What are their problem areas? Because we can all learn from each other. And so we have to build upon that. And so here's some resources. I'm not going to talk about this right here. It's a lot of text, but if the slides are shared, you can click these web links and find out a lot of capabilities and resources from some of our government partners for those with special needs. And it's just a wealth of information that you can really dive into and learn more about. And so there's my contact information. So feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to pass this right over to Tafa to talk about things down in American Samoa. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions later. Tafa, over to you.
Talofa from American Samoa. I'm Tafa Tupuola, the State Director for the Pacific Center in Human Security. I'm going to share from an equity lens around disability and access functional needs. And I hope to engage everyone who's participating today with the content that is being shared. So if I was to show this image, and I'm sure everyone is taking a look at this now and seeing the difference with equality and equity, there's a lot to be said here. So, you know, as planners, how does this image affect you? You and what you do as you plan? If you're a person with a disability, how does this affect you on seeing the other side? So there's several ways you want to look at this image. You can look at this image up from a lens of, is it about the view, or it's about the fence, or it could be about the stools in which we step on, or it could be the materials of trying to coordinate to get it there. Whatever lens you're looking from as the role that you wear, it's very important that there's an equitable outcome and that everyone is treated fairly from a whole community lens. So please, if you can, input your comments of what you see and how this affects you in the chat box. I would love to see what everyone has to say. If we were to take a look at back in 2018, there was an early warning system that was tested out. So give me a thumbs up if you received a wireless emergency alert last year, October 4th. There was a nationwide wireless emergency alert test, and I'm curious to know how many received their emergency alert from their service provider. So this will be interesting to know. In 2018, an early warning system was tested out about the presidential alert. And it was interesting that when this was tested out, the Pacific territories did not receive the presidential alert. And so this got me thinking as to what does that look like for the disability and access functional needs. When the missile alert happened in Hawaii, there was a lot around trying to address what went wrong. But there wasn't much conversation around who didn't get the alerts. So from the disability and access functional needs experience and conversation we've had, there's always a disconnection about including us, that this was the question that was brought in various conversation of, well, who didn't get the alerts? This will then take an experience as an opportunity to try and improve our planning better. So why is early warning system important? If we were to use the example of boarding an airplane, usually the sequence is that they board those who uses the wheelchair or need extra assistance first, and then comes the parents and the children and the family member, anybody else who may need extra assistance, they usually go first in boarding. And this is because it takes more time to get everyone settled in and in order to depart on time. So there's a lot that we need to talk about, as that not every disability is the same. Some may require more time, and then don't always assume that somebody with a disability has a caregiver. We are in a different generation where we promote more independency. If there's a bullet missing that you think is very important to talk about early warning system, go ahead and add that to the chat box. So the tsunami alerts, I thought about this a lot as we tend to push out a lot of tsunami alerts. American Samoa was affected in 2009 from a tsunami. And, you know, when we push out alert, it's always important to use plain language, and local language is just as important. If we're going to tell the general public about directions, perhaps we should also use landmarks. Not everyone is familiar with east and west, north and south, but landmarks also works for the locals. And then also create messaging template ahead of time before a disaster that is well understood by a 5th grader. And so this helps kind of like guide the threshold of how we're creating messages. Now, accessible action would be quite different. You can use this as a tool. Anybody in a household that has a family member with mobility can create their own action. So if I was to compare it side by side with the tsunami alert, someone who, if realistically, American Samoa only has one road to evacuate, I mean, to get on and just get on the road and evacuate. And then realistically, many of us live in a flooding zone area. So you want to create an accessible action that fits your household. You want to build your network of people who you know can support you when you're going to evacuate. And that means if they have transportation, who is that going to be? So you may want to integrate it as early as possible, because you know it's going to take more time for you to evacuate. If you have any other suggestion that can help build this toolkit, add that to the chat box. And that's it. And I'll turn the time over to Ginger.
Eileen, go ahead.
Thank you, Ginger. Thank you, Tafa. So, good morning, everyone. Hafaday and Tiro. I'm Eileen Babauta, and I'm the director for the USED and the CNMI. I'm going to just talk a little bit about community engagement and how we get our CNMI weather ready and be able to support all our people with disabilities. And this would not have been possible without the support and partnerships of our disability network, our disability network partners, and their collaboration. And so allow me to share this video that will present an overview of this partnership in the CNMI.
Voices of the CNMI aims to empower individuals with disabilities to unite, advocate, and become a productive citizen of the CNMI.
Here at the CNMI Council on Developmental Disabilities, we continue to work hard to amplify the voice of individuals with developmental disabilities and their families, because the decisions we make here in the CNMI have a significant impact on their lives.
The Center for Living Independently provides a variety of skills and training to support our consumers to live independently.
The CACC Population Health Services, Maternal, Infant, Child, and Adolescent Health, the MICA programs aim to promote and improve the health and wellness of women, infants, children, including children with special healthcare needs and their families through the delivery of quality prevention programs and effective partnerships.
The Commonwealth Transit Authority provides transportation for our consumers to access, engage, and participate in life skills and training opportunities to improve their quality of life.
Here at the Northern Marianas College University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, we promote, support, and enhance independence, productivity, integration, and inclusion of individuals with disabilities and their families in the community through our 4 core functions in education, research, community service, and dissemination of information.
The DCCA Division of Youth Services Family and Youth Enhancement Program offers youth, parent, and community services that promotes the overall well-being of children and families, including case managing individuals and families with children with disabilities.
The Northern Marianas Protection and Advocacy Systems Incorporated works to ensure the rights of people with disabilities to live independently and fully integrated within the community.
It is the public school system's goal to ensure all children with disabilities are located, identified, and provided a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment that prepares them for a future education, employment, and independent living.
The mission of the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation is to increase employment and promote independence for eligible individuals with disabilities in the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands.
So through these partnerships, we were able to provide these trainings for the CNMI. The Disability Awareness for First Responders has always been presented by the PD network. So we provided disability rights training from NDPTC, assistive technology demonstrations from the council, community tips for first responders from the USED. And usually we also provide trainings from Daryl Schaefer from the University of Alaska with disasters and disabilities, where he talks a little bit about functional and access needs during disasters and emergencies. We've also, this is where the fire has lit, where we participated in the first Primo conference in Hawaii. As you can see, we've also worked with Roxanne Crawford and my counterpart, Tafa, and all the other participants. It was a real great experience to be able to learn more from them. This is the first time that we've ever had the meeting with FEMA, I believe, Ms. Ginger, and I know Ms. Ginger will probably talk about it a little bit later on. And through those meetings, these partnerships actually started, and thank you to the NDPTC for being able to support the CNMI and all of us with regards to providing disaster awareness for caregivers, disaster awareness for community leaders. And these trainings were done on Saipan, Tinian, and Rota. And so full inclusion. We always ensure that our sister islands are included. And then we've got tsunami awareness with Landon. And again, this partnership and this collaboration and started off actually from the tsunami awareness training. And again, these trainings were done on Saipan, Tinian, and Rota. Now, through that is where the One Marianas movement started, where Landon and I, with support from Tafa and Ms. Ginger and the PTC, we started this movement to be able to try to create a, maybe not a universal approach, but a way where we have consistency and being able to support each other with functional and access needs during disasters and emergencies. And through this, we had a town hall meeting during Primo 2024, where the CNMI hosted this year's Primo. This was where we got a lot of feedback and information from our community, sharing their thoughts, their needs, and will help us to be able to create a movement and just continue to support our people with disabilities. And this is one of the projects that I'm currently working on with the support from the Guam DICIT, the Department of Integrated Services for Individuals with Disabilities. So we visited their office during a trip to Guam, where me and Landon kind of continue to work closely with regards to how can we be weather ready, disaster ready. And what we wanted to do was to create a volunteer registry to support our first responders and provide that access during these disasters, before preparation before an emergency or disaster. And so this is it for me. Thank you so much. Looking forward to questions afterwards.
Okay, thank you, Landon, Tafa, and Eileen. For kind of we're talking about the big issues, right? So we started off our discussion, our panel today with what disaster planning is, what are the impacts, and what the Weather Service from a federal perspective is doing and trying to address the needs of people with disabilities and our vulnerable populations or covered populations. Then Tafa gave us a perspective of equity and some of the work that she's doing out in American Samoa in the South. And then Eileen had very contextualized and very specific things on how CNMI has taken this movement and in being very, very intentional and very inclusive of their action to make sure that the needs of the vulnerable populations are being addressed. So I want to tie some of this into sharing some of my own lived experiences and some protocols and tips when you are developing programs involving Indigenous communities or cultural communities, vulnerable populations in the Pacific. So I'm going to also ask your participation as we are going along to put your experiences or share a tip, share a protocol that you've had in your own work in our chat. So by no means am I an expert in this. I've often, it's the thought that experiences varies with individuals and along with their own interpretations and meanings. So I don't claim to be an expert or try to be disrespectful of anyone's culture. But this is meant to be this sharing of knowledge and sharing of experience. Every community is different, and this is meant to be an overview as not directly linked to any one community. And at the end, knowing some of you that are on the call, I'd also like for you to share some of your experiences and your teachings. It is not an exhaustive list of things, but it is kind of things that have been experienced over time. So Indigenous peoples from communities and organizations were often invited to participate in projects, to give lectures at universities or activities in learning and research and service. And then when we're launching projects like Weather Ready Nation or One Marianas within the communities, there are, some things for you to consider. And when it comes to Indigenous inclusion, although the way we do things might have changed a little bit, meaning that we have new tools to engage and to consult and to include and encourage participation, the reality is not much has changed in the need for inclusion, participation, engagement, consultations when it comes to Indigenous communities. So in recent years, there's been a significant shift and movement in how research and projects and studies are carried out. Many institutions have ethical guidelines themselves and research protocol agreements And many Indigenous organizations have established principles and protocols for research, for researchers that they are required to follow. And so these are just some of the things that I would like to share. And so we'll touch a little bit about traditional knowledge and studies, your pre-work before you enter a community, engaging with the communities and some of the tips for that, acknowledgement and informing people about risks as their knowledge, their traditional knowledge is vulnerable, and it's vulnerable to threats, right? Externalities, and tips to participate and reciprocate. Working in communities, it's about reciprocity. So prior to starting your work within communities, first know your community, know what you're getting, who you're going to be working with, who you're going to be interacting, and be sensitive that Indigenous peoples or communities, they've been studied extensively, many times, not ethically at times, on many occasions, and not necessarily with their permission. And so the significance of traditional knowledge is on the rise. And so the expectation is there are going to be more requests for their participation, for their knowledge, and for their time. And so ensure that those who are going to be working on your project or yourself too, that they're fully trained in certain capacities, right? So training that involves Indigenous relations so that everybody's aware of some of these contexts. Provide training in traditional knowledge systems. What are they and how they differ from Western sciences? Provide training on the legalities of these things, if there are any relevant local and national policies and regulations that might be applicable or impacted. Create an understanding of your local networks, what resources you have within the communities, and create a sense of their local customs and norms and the politics. Their politics on your government side and politics within the community or the village, at the village level that you're going to be working in. And things that always come up in my work is we must take time to understand and respect the colonial history, whether I'm working in Vanuatu or a U.S. territory or so. Having an understanding of that history is very, very critical in our project implementation and project planning. When it comes to engaging with the communities, so timing is everything. Things that you thought, oh, okay, it doesn't matter, but timing is everything when you're working within communities. Don't rush people. They don't go on your schedule or your deadlines. So avoid those words, avoid deadline, avoid, I have this report I have to deliver, so and so, like your words. Have those cultural considerations for the activities and festivities, the religious holidays, the funerals. In Landon's line of work, be considerate of your typhoon season. Don't have training within that season, or avoid those types of things. So, and then if you are working in a fishing community or farming community, those seasons become a part of your planning when you are going to work in these communities. Always include Indigenous engagement, participation early. And then what I mean there by real is that you don't just send an email or send a mail or paper. You can't just send a letter or a piece of paper or a note and call and say, we have our Indigenous engagement. You must have real, fulsome discussions and thoughts and exchanges with the people that you're going to be working with. And when I talk about early, it's about the visioning stage before you even get into discovery and then implementation. Not after the design, not after you come in with a draft of your report, no, and then you ask them for their feedback. It's not that, right? They have to be part of your planning from the beginning. And then you know, as I mentioned, be generous with your time. They are not on your time. So make sure that availability, you budget a lot of time to be working in the community. Establishing that initial contact is generally best done face to face, not through an email. Avoid, you know, we've been zoomed out since COVID, but you know, it's a tool for us. But that first contact is very, very critical as part of your planning process. And provide funding for a community to have a liaison, right? For your project, to be able to be that contact person, that go-to point of contact person for you at the local level. Ensure that you are acknowledging their territory, their traditional territory, their land and traditional acknowledgements. So ensure that that's part of your planning process. And at times, honorarium and gifts exchanges are a critical part of your culture. You don't show up to someone's house for dinner with empty-handed. So same concept that we adopt in all of our projects. So, acknowledge and inform people about risks. You know, there is risk in people sharing their knowledge. Traditional knowledge is vulnerable to misappropriation and misuse. So make sure that you are honest with your community, the indigenous community, about issues that will arise, such as ownership. Who has ownership of the knowledge, the control, the access, the possession, right? So indigenous communities have ownership over their own information and knowledge. They have control over their information and used or access, and must be consulted and give informed consent. Indigenous communities must have access to their own information and decide on the group and individual access rights. And in possession is indigenous communities are stewards of their own information. And we must also respect that when community members do not want to share their knowledge, and that's okay. And participate. Participate, be visible within the community, be a part of their community. Indigenous community, they incorporate traditional practices in their daily lives. It's part of their daily activities. And there's great importance on protocols, on art, on ceremonies, on celebrations, and the social structure and of their diverse cultures. And it's essential to recognize that. So participate and be a part of their community. And it also, you know, avoids and prevents these unintentional acts that may be misconstructed as disrespectful. Include traditional knowledge and environmental and land assessments within your planning. And reciprocate. So if you're looking for that social return on investments, what you want to do to make sure is to include that participation and the reciprocity. So whether it be the cultural, the financial, the human resources, all of that. So your project will be better, right? In that sense, the planning part of it, and it'll be better received as well. So it's and ensure that there's understanding of limits and proportionalities and responsibilities. So there's a ton of different things that go under each of these 5 general areas. But I'd like you to consider what tips and lived experiences working in indigenous communities that you have to share with us that would be helpful and for all of us who are working with indigenous communities and with vulnerable populations. So with that, I will open it up for some questions from our audience today.
Mm-hmm. Hi, Ginger. We have a really good question from Maggie. She let me see. She asked a question about vulnerable populations that may not necessarily be seen. Let's see. Tafa answered it. But maybe for those who were unable to read the response, it says, how do we reach out to some vulnerable communities who may have been seen as invisible, in particular for those who might not have connections with support groups or networks, or, you know, those who may not be seen in, you know, gathering in areas where everyone gathers, or communication challenges. Do you have any advice for trying to reach out to those populations that may be viewed as invisible?
So I'll go ahead and answer that. You know,
Thank you.
I think that's one thing great about the Pacific Islands. Yeah. Everyone is easily connected through somehow. So I would always recommend whenever it has to do with disability, sometimes you can just go to a special education office and just inquire, and then they can basically connect you within a network within that community. One thing I always like to tell folks is that if you want to hear the truth, go directly to the organizations and then you go from there. Because from a government lens, we see things differently. But if you want to bridge the gap of equity, it's best to go directly to the community so you can kind of like collect the information necessary to see the view. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to follow up on Tafa. I think she hit some good points there. And I think a lot of this really comes right in what we do with our daily mission here at the Weather Service: interact and meet people, especially seeing people, people that look different from you. I think we can engage, and we're in such a diverse region of the world over here in the Pacific Islands. But again, listen, the most important part of any conversation is to listen to people, listen to their needs, understand their needs and their backgrounds. But also from an agency standpoint, social media, you cannot underestimate the use and importance of social media from emergency management. We started our Facebook page in 2013, and instead of the Weather Service being an agency that just pushes out information to the webpage, once we got that social media connection, it was a two-way conversation. So you post information on social media, you get the comments, you get the feedback, the emails, and you can see where the problem areas are in the community, what's not resonating well with people, what are the areas that you can improve in your communication. So having that conversation on social media, but also, again, as Tafa mentioned, engage with community organizations and agencies that are focused on different aspects of the community, whether it's a different cultural group or the homeless folks on the islands. We have a large homeless population, unfortunately, on Guam. How are they getting information? What organizations are involved to reaching out to them? So ask those questions, listen, learn, and engage. It's a very proactive approach.
I'll go ahead and share as well, and as a follow-up to Fa and Landon's. And so here in the CNMI too, you know, we listen and engage and respect. However, to be able to find those individuals who seem invisible, that's where we work with our partners. That's where engagement comes in with our communities, to work with them and to be able to kind of just find out, check in, hey, you know, just simple talk stories, kind of, do you know this and that? And slowly we begin to find, all right, so who do we go to? How do we refer? And how can we provide that service for them? Right now, we're trying to work with our mayor's office to be able to create this mapping system. Excuse me, sorry. Mapping system to be able to provide some outreach and outreach services and a campaign maybe of sorts to be able to kind of locate and identify how can we provide these services to those individuals who live farther inland. And there we have to work with our municipality because it's such a small island. So that would be my first go-to, is to find out, you know, where are all these homes located and are they accessible, and be able to provide that service for them. Thank you.
And I just wanted to make a note that Salevi, Tia and Liz Fisher has also shared some resources in our chat. Okay, I have a question. If any of our panelists would like to share a personal experience where equity was achieved when providing access to vulnerable populations, a personal experience, hands-on.
I think right now, I can share an experience. What has transformed throughout the years. In some cases, when a disaster happened, a lot of times the household. So the way it usually works is that the household, if your house was damaged, it's based on the number of folks that are living in that household, the household income. And so that determines your financial assistance to help recover and rebuild. For a house of the same type of number of family members, it could be a member of 4, and the household income is the same. If that one household has a family member that has a disability, the inequity issue concern would be that they're being seen as the same level of household income, because the household that has the individual with the disability would spend more for the care because of the disability compared to a household that doesn't have an individual that needs extra care or financial assistance. I hope that makes sense. So the financial assistance would be seen as unfair when they recover. That family member with the individual disability will spend more of their financial assistance to make sure that the ramp is in place, that the home is accessible. But what we always get concerned about is that if that is seen as extra financial expenses, a lot of times the priority to ensure that that individual lives independently in their own house is not going to be considered a priority. So if we were to address equity, it would be, so how can we make sure that the household income is not seen the same when it comes to an individual with a disability? And how can we ensure that the access to live independently within their own home is still done freely? I hope that makes sense.
Thanks, Tafa. I know that Kung mentioned that Samuel has a question. Kung, do you want to share that? It looks like you might have a better. Oh, here Liz is adding on to Tafa's statement. What Tafa's talking about is an added issue for mainland agency standards as well, versus specific living realities of generational multi-families living under one roof. The mainland policies don't address and have a hard time understanding this situation or this way of life. Kung, do you want to share the question from Samuel?
Yes, thanks, Karen. Sam was talking about accessibility. So they're saying, what about isolated pockets of underserved communities who have English as a second language who may not have access to internet? How do we reach those communities?
Yeah. And I want to take a stab at that first, and then I'll probably pass it over to the rest of the panelists who may have different angles of approach from their experiences. But yeah, that's a great question, Samuel. That's definitely a concern here on Guam, where we have so many people from so many different places, and many of our population here on Guam are ESL, or maybe even English as a third language, or not at all. And so having this conversation here right now. This is the first step of diving into these problem areas and learning more about it. And so we work closely with the Homeland Security Office over here, who work closely with the Mayor's Council, who really know their villages and the communities. But of course, some of the more populated villages, it gets difficult to get to every neighborhood. One of the things that Eileen mentioned was getting a volunteer registry with problem areas. And of course, I think lack of internet access is something to be considered, because if everybody's communicating on the internet via the web, um, those people without it may not get that critical, short-fused warning information. And so that's why we in the Weather Service, we try to communicate through as many means possible, whether it's a broadcast media, newspaper, radio, AM, FM radio, also our social media, but also NOAA weather radio. That's a great tool to have in your house, that when we have warning information coming out from weather alerts, that automatically notifies your radio to alert you in the house. They can also have certain attachments to it for special needs. So, Eileen, I want to put you on the spot and see if you can also tackle that, because ESL, that's a big concern in our region. But Samuel, thank you for that question, because that's a part of this process, is making these issues known.
Oh, Landon, you're so good at that. So one of the things that we are really trying to work on, and we're partnering with the Guam Community College to, because the ASL part and the translation piece is really important also for us in the CNMI. And so we are starting a community interpreter program, and hopefully should launch this year, as well as providing a certification in ASL. Now, I wanted to kind of also touch on sharing a story with one of my family members that actually lives on Rhoda. And, you know, I came to do some trainings, and she reached out and she goes, do you know anything about the food distribution and stuff that, you know, we're being distributed in the community? And I said, did you get any? And she said, no, I never got the notice. And she lives farther inland. So that brought to me, you know, that movement of like, how can we better provide access? And I think we just got to go old school, you know, old school meaning the traditional house to house. Like I said, when you know, families, close-knit communities, we know where people live. And so as a good neighbor, we really want to try and reach out and share these resources, you know, and if there's no transportation, maybe share again that transportation, or go down and find the head of the project and say, you're missing some people farther up there, you know, and do that collaboration. But with as far as, you know, trying to provide this, I honestly believe, and this is the movement that I'm trying to engage in, is how can we provide access to those that live farther inland, or ESL, or, you know, deaf or hard of hearing. And so we are currently working on that as we speak. And so hopefully we can have something to share soon.
I want to add to that. It was a number of years ago, I did a social science communications survey here on Guam, and we wanted to find out if weather communications could be better communicated on the islands, and how. We want to look at the means of communications, how people got their information, what their sources for weather information was. And so when we had the survey developed, the key part was getting stakeholders involved. We had political leaders sharing it on their social media within their offices. The broadcast media were stakeholders in communicating that survey and sharing it publicly, as well as our Weather Service Facebook page. But we had to keep in mind, not everybody has internet. A lot of people get their information from printed newspapers. Also, they don't have TV or cable access. So we had door-to-door volunteers, Homeland Security and the AmeriCorps volunteers. They were going door-to-door in some of our villages to get the Manamco, the older generation here on the island, to engage in the surveys. And so we covered all aspects of the community with the Micronesia community, as well as the Marshallese community, because we wanted input from every angle of our society here. But that's a good question. There is another question about contingency plans before, during, and after disaster. And tomorrow is World Meteorological Day, and I'm giving a presentation to Bicol University in the Philippines, and we're really going to be talking about communications. And the communications, all those partnerships, they have to happen before a disaster. And so the big part of success and saving your community before and during and after a disaster is communicating, working with people before, having those plans in place, working with people like Eileen and Tafa and Ginger, having those networks already aligned so that when a disaster comes, it's not a panic mode to get things in order, but your plan's already in place and you just ride right into the process. And so I think that's going to be a key part of success for a disaster. And if anybody wants to add on to that.
Yeah, I think another thing also, it brings up a lot of other issues about digital equity, right? So we have the technology, as we're looking at alternative technologies or alternative modes to communicate and get the message out. We consider that not everybody has the skills to access the internet. So even if you do have internet, but now the next issue are access to devices, access to accessible devices, and then access to your own skills to be able to use the devices. And then the support or the security issues that come with that. So there's a lot of those types of considerations as well, as we are introducing new modalities of delivering service. So we look at service equity, we look at digital equity, we look at all these equity issues that come with messaging, right? Multi-hazard planning. So it's a challenge around overall. So yeah.
I'd like to add on to that, Ms. Ginger. So just a couple of weeks ago, I believe, the council has reached out to the partners to be able to go to the legislature and support the next gen 911 system. And so, you know, we're hoping that this system will provide added supports again, because it is supposed to, oh, excuse me, within that 911 system, you know, it'll be able to identify clearly the location of the caller. And so we're looking to be able to support that as our next step with regards to responses to emergencies.
So to jump in on Samuel's comment, he said in the past, there used to be an assigned point of contact at Homeland Security during disaster who keeps disability service providers updated. That is true. And in many cases, they come in at the 2-3 weeks. If you're living on an island, it's usually from the federal support side. But remember, on the federal support side, they come to support what is existing now, your current emergency operation plan. And in many cases, our emergency operation plan does not include equity. You know, disability, when it comes to disability, a lot of times our leader thinks ADA ramps and parking is sufficient enough. It's more than ramps and parking.
We are at the top of the hour. You know, for those who do need to drop, please feel free to drop. But I know there's some burning questions, so I'm going to give an opportunity for the two. One is a hand that's raised, and then John's question on chat. So I'm just going to give the panel an opportunity to answer those questions. So I'll start with John's question. Any suggestions for how to raise awareness after disaster of existing community-based organizations focused on assisting with disaster recovery in these communities? So I'll open it up to Landon, Tafa, or Eileen. And then final question from Hannah.
So a lot of times I'd like to say this is the valuable presence of a VOAD, Volunteer of Active Disasters. Because a lot of times they can also help respond and coordinate resources to those who may not be eligible for certain services. And so they can also serve as a case manager. What we struggle with, to tell you the truth, in some cases, we focus a lot on the response training and preparedness, but there's not enough training and investment in the recovery. So if we were to think about the several phases, you know, we go the response and then we get to the recovery, it dwindles down and there's hardly anybody still standing. But the recovery is the important part when it comes to a person with a disability, because there's still several unmet needs that needs to be addressed. So a lot needs to be said about recovery. Hopefully we can talk about just recovery and what that looks like for disability and access functional needs.
Aloha, Hannah, can you press your mute button? I believe you're muted right now. Mahalo, Tafa, for that wonderful explanation. Oh, okay, here we have Hannah.
Well, aloha, everybody. Sorry, this isn't Hannah. This is Alex. I don't know why it says Hannah on there, but actually Hannah is my consulting partner with Haas Sustainability. I know she was on the call earlier. Somehow our names got switched. But yeah, thank you so much for the conversation and all that you know, you're bringing to the surface here for everybody. I just wanted to share a couple of things that we've done on Maui that have helped in terms of the broadband access for remote communities. We have several here in Maui County. Hannah and I are with Haas Sustainability now, a sustainability consulting firm, but we used to work for the County of Maui in the Office of Climate Change, Resiliency, and Sustainability. And during that time, some of the initiatives we were involved in included one, having a van or bus that can go out to remote communities and has a mobile Wi-Fi signal that people in communities that don't have good, steady broadband access can tie into those mobile broadband services. And so that was helpful, especially during times of emergency response and recovery. Another one is, which we saw, we're continuing to see to some degree with the August 8th and 9th wildfire response here, particularly for West Maui in the Lahaina area, was setting up Starlink access. And so Starlink allows you with satellite access to internet and phone and connectivity. That was very critical to allow families to communicate with one another from one side of the island to the other, and even outside, you know, to other islands. So that was the second one. And then a third is this concept of resiliency hubs, which I know is gaining traction globally, but certainly here in Hawaii as well. And establishing these hubs that are really these community gathering areas that serve people during non-emergency times, during, you know, everyday times, but also during emergency and recovery and also has the ability to provide ongoing internet access and backup power. So if there's, you know, if the services are down elsewhere, at least people have a place to go outside of their homes where they know they can have secure access to that communication and other services. So those are three examples just wanted to share with the group, but thank you everyone for all your contributions.
Thank you so much for that. I think that's good point for us to end, you know, listing some of those possible, very real solutions that are ongoing now in the Outer Islands in Maui with the mobile vans and then the resilience hubs. Absolutely something that is applicable to all of our communities, whether you are in the Pacific or mainland or other international communities. The Resilience Hub is a growing concept that is proven to be, you know, useful gathering space for communities during planning, pre-disaster and post-disaster. So with that, thank you all so much for joining our session today. Just quickly go over to Karen if there are any general announcements you'd like to have before we close out.
Well, I just like to thank you, Ginger, for being our host with the most and, you know, stepping in. We really appreciate it. Hosting our third Thursday, and please stay tuned, everyone who's attended. Another thing is that we will be sharing this video on our NDPTC YouTube channel. I believe it's in the chat. And again, in closing, we'd just like to thank Ginger. We also like to thank Tafa, Landon, and Eileen for your excellent presentations and wonderful discussion. Until next time, stay safe. Aloha.